Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are absolutely dismantling that exhausting myth that you need to be a glowing, radiant optimist to build something great. We're going to unpack the radically honest source material from Pat Dowd's brilliant book, The Pessimist's Guide to Inspiring Action. Because as it turns out, building your next big project doesn't require hope at all. It really just requires motion.
So let's just jump right out of the gate with a pretty provocative question. What would you start if you genuinely didn't need to believe it would succeed? Because, well, statistically speaking, your next project is probably going to fail. Now, I know that sounds incredibly bleak right off the bat, but let's just accept that base rate for a moment. Over the course of this explainer, we're going to see exactly why that realization is actually fantastic, totally liberating news.
Section 1. The Optimism Tax. We're starting off by looking at the heavy toll of modern manifestation culture and the sheer unending exhaustion of having to constantly stay positive.
Think about the stark contrast between these two approaches. The text outlines that optimists pay this massive, hidden tax just managing their own mood. To start a project, they feel like they need perfect cosmic alignment, 3 signs from the universe, and absolute unshakable confidence. So when they hit a roadblock, they are completely devastated. But the pessimistic builder? They just need a free afternoon and a vague sense of resignation. They expect things to go wrong. So when obstacle number 4 inevitably pops up, they are actually vindicated. Because they were never attached to some grand, perfect vision, it's incredibly easy for them to just pivot and keep moving forward.
The crucial takeaway here is that optimism is highly conditional. It requires so much constant, exhausting maintenance. You know the drill, right? Vision boards, perfect timing, lavender candles, waiting around for that elusive feeling of inspiration to finally strike. But the text points out that action actually requires absolutely none of that to exist. You don't need a cheerful chaperone to get to work. You can feel absolutely terrible about a project's prospects and still write the code or draft the chapter anyway.
Moving on to Section 2, the freedom of low expectations. Let's see how this framework turns into an actual superpower for getting things out the door.
So why the number 50? Well, the author lays out this simple yet totally profound mathematical truth. If you want to succeed, you have to start. If you don't start, your chances of success are literally zero. The optimist who's paralyzed by perfectionism and the need to guarantee success never starts, meaning they have exactly a 0% chance. But the pessimist who starts, even while totally expecting to fail, suddenly has a 50% chance of success. I don't know about you, but I will take those odds every single time. Beginning is really the only thing that matters.
And that brings us to the 30% rule. This is a really tactical framework from the text designed to lower the stakes so far into the basement that you can't help but actually ship a functional, albeit incredibly ugly, prototype. It goes like this. You start by defining what your 100% perfect, world-changing vision looks like. Let yourself dream for about 30 seconds. Then, you slash it down to exactly 30%, just the absolute bare minimum that is still useful. You give yourself explicit written permission to commit to that ugly version. And finally, you ship the garbage.
Because remember, functional always ships and perfect never does. Perfect is literally a myth chased by optimists, and it keeps them locked in the planning phase forever. But pessimists, by shipping their 30% garbage, they are out there right now gathering real, tangible user feedback. Done always, always beats perfect.
Section 3. A history of doubt. If you're sitting there right now feeling like an imposter or a fraud for doubting your own projects, let's look at the historical data to validate exactly how normal you really are. Just look at the patron saint of pessimistic creation himself, Franz Kafka. He literally gave his friend explicit, legally documented instructions to have all his work destroyed upon his death because he was utterly convinced it was worthless. Thankfully, his friend completely ignored him, and Kafka built an eternal legacy anyway. He didn't write with the delusion that his work would matter. He just expected obscurity, and well, he got statues instead.
Then we've got Samuel Beckett. He didn't win the Nobel Prize in Literature by vibrating with positive destiny or reciting morning affirmations. He won it by staring into the void, accepting the total absurdity of it all, and typing anyway. His plays are literal monuments to futility, yet they're absolutely brilliant. He just kept failing in increasingly interesting ways.
And perhaps the wildest example from the text, Charles Darwin. Darwin sat on the theory of evolution for 20 whole years because he was terrified of being wrong. He filled notebooks with doubts, actively trying to prove himself wrong. But this brilliantly illustrates that extreme doubt isn't an obstacle to genius, it is actually a rigorous methodology. Because he expected people to attack his work, he built it to withstand any attack.
Section 4. Assume failure. Build anyway. All right, let's dive into the actual tactical shift here and translate this liberating philosophy into a daily field manual.
Here's where we flip traditional planning completely on its head by doing a failure pre-mortem. Instead of visualizing success, you assume death. You jump 6 months into the future, assume your project has totally failed, and write down exactly why. Then you rank those failure modes. The text notes that most of the time, it's actually not the market that kills the project, it's you getting bored or quitting. So you accept that likely failure, and then you design your project so that even when it dies, it provides the most educational autopsy possible.
And this leads us directly to the concept of the minimum testable failure. Instead of chasing a minimum viable product, which, let's be honest, still secretly hopes for success, you aim for the fastest, smallest way to fail. The logic here is pretty bulletproof. Failing after 2 weeks is infinitely better than failing after 2 years. If you can't finish a 10-minute task, you were never going to finish a 50-hour project. You want to optimize for learning what doesn't work as fast as humanly possible.
Section 5. The regret portfolio. Let's see how all this builds into an entirely new way to make hard decisions when all your options look completely terrifying.
So the crucial point here is that you simply cannot avoid regret. Every single path you choose is going to have downsides. The author suggests we think of our lives as a collection of regrets. You aren't trying to magically find a perfect path with absolutely no regret. You are simply choosing which specific flavor of regret you are most willing to tolerate carrying around. By laying out your options like a financial portfolio, you can clearly see the downsides of both choices. If you quit your job, sure, you'll regret the loss of income. But if you don't quit, you'll regret wondering, what if? You aren't looking for the good option. You're simply investing in the least bad regrets. You just choose the timeline of regrets that you can actually stomach.
To radically speed up your momentum, the text introduces the reversibility test. You look at your bad options and ask one simple question: can I undo this? Starting a side project or sending a difficult email, that's reversible. Having a child or buying a house, not so much. If a decision can be undone, you need to stop overthinking it and just pick the least terrible option in under 10 minutes.
I really want you to take this next thought to heart, maybe even say it out loud to yourself. No one will care, so I am free. The text reminds us that in 100 years, almost nothing we are doing today will matter. Your work probably won't matter, and instead of being depressing, that realization is the ultimate permission slip. It frees you to try anything right now without the crushing, paralyzing weight of legacy or perfectionism. Which brings us right back to where we started. If failure is already priced into the model, if the pressure is totally off, and the universe is wonderfully indifferent to your grand plans, what glorious, terrible 30% complete garbage are you going to bravely ship today? Because remember, pessimists don't wait for certainty. They just do the next thing anyway. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.